Thank you. So I've made it a bit more general because I don't want to give all this airtime just to Apple Pay versus Bitcoin. So how to make Bitcoin attractive for consumers? How can we find Bitcoin's killer app? A little bit about myself. I work at InnoPay. We're independent consultants in the areas of payments and identity innovation and strategy. I'm standing right in front of the screen for you. Or, okay. We're located in Amsterdam. I've been active in the area of electronic payments for over 10 years now, and with Bitcoin since 2010. And I'm very the first time I read about it, I was very much already inspired by the subject. But we've also done quite a lot of thinking about, okay, how can we really make Bitcoin big? So there's a lot of complexity around Bitcoin, and how can you make that accessible for a larger group of users? So there's a lot of developments in technology, of course. I'm not going to talk about that because there's a lot of speakers in the rest of this whole conference who are talking about that and sharing interesting ideas about that. There's a lot of uncertainty around regulations. I'm also not going to talk about that, but there will be a few speakers I saw this afternoon who are addressing that topic. So I'm talking about this. How can we get to adoption? So right now you have like the very early innovators, a step you've already had. You've had the early adopters getting in, and so how do you get to this like majority phase, where you get the real big amounts of people and amounts of companies who start to do this? So it's not because it's not that electronic payments are kind of a niche product. In fact, just yesterday, there's a Dutch press statement about that electronic payments is growing massively. It has been growing massively again in the past year, and it has been doing so for year over year ever since they introduced things like PIN and ID. It's also, you see that mobile payments are constantly seen as like the next big thing. So Visa really wants to adopt mobile payments. Apple Pay, of course, already mentioned by Bas, is seen as really a revolution that will put payments really on your smartphone. Bit of a cautionary remark there is that, of course, payments through mobile has been hyped as the next big thing for at least the last 5 years, if not longer. So it apparently has also some kind of adoption barriers, which is not really getting there yet. So how does Bitcoin then compare to these kinds of successful or seem to be successful payment methods, electronic payments methods specifically? So I thought, okay, let's look at what we all know is kind of the unique selling points of Bitcoin. If you explain to like your grandmother what Bitcoin is, why is it different from normal money? Okay, so there's no central bank in the Bitcoin system. Awesome. Is that something which is going to help us win consumers? Well, who is going to say, okay, I'm going to use Bitcoin because there's no central bank? So you have these kind of the ideological users, wondering if the first adopters, but I'm pretty sure we can agree that that's not going to be true if you ask people here on the street. The majority will not say, okay, yeah, I'm really looking for a payment method where there's no central bank, where there's no banks involved. Interesting. I want to have the discussion as well if that's really true or not. I'm skeptical that will ever become true. unless there becomes a real crisis of faith in banks. And if it didn't happen in 2008, then I don't know what will make the majority of people have a crisis of faith in banks, but we don't know. Okay, so no central bank as of itself is not necessarily going to help us bridge the gap. Okay, but Bitcoin is also really low cost transactions. Okay, awesome, great. It's the easy jet of payments. So, is that interesting for consumers? Well, is it really low cost for consumers? That's of course a big question. Because as a consumer in the developed world, I don't experience a lot of costs for my payments. I'm not asked to pay more if I use a PIN in a store. That used to be the case just after the introduction of PIN terminals, maybe in smaller stores. You had to pay 20 cents extra if you were paying amounts under 10 euros, but that's almost never true anymore. If I pay online, I rarely have to pay extra to use Ideal or to use credit cards. So for me as a consumer, okay, what's my benefit to use Bitcoin?
Well, does it also account for the costs for the seller, for the one who's selling the merchants?
Yeah, so for merchants, I agree with you that for merchants there's now something interesting happening here, and in certain contexts, in a certain context there will definitely be benefits, and that will be kind of the whole underlying storyline if you follow the rest of the presentation. That depending on context, there will be definitely benefits to things like Bitcoin. So for a merchant, lower costs can definitely be interesting, especially if it's very small transactions, for example. So this is the whole micropayments thing. But then the question is, will they then leverage those benefits towards the consumers? And so is it for the consumer then still interesting to choose Bitcoin for the cost aspect? Or is there, so because we were talking here about how can consumers adopt. If I had a lot more time in my presentation, we could go into the whole concept of that payments is a two-sided market where you have the payer on the one hand and the merchants on the other hand, and anything that benefits the merchants will indirectly always also benefit the group of payers, and the other way around, because you have network effects, etc., etc. But that goes into A, way too much theory, and B, okay, let's keep it a little bit short and also have some room for discussion. So will merchants leverage this discount that they might have towards their consumers? Well, obviously, if they would otherwise not be doing any business, then yes. So there's potential. There's potential. So let's keep that one in mind. Low cost is definitely something which is a good thing.
Also the other way around. They now put extra cost in. You don't know it's hidden cost for the payment, right? Like with a credit card.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you already pay extra.
Yes, but it's hard to compare them then one-on-one, because the extra costs in a credit card payment are because there's also extra added value services in a credit card payment in some sense, because you have the ability to have fraud detection and chargebacks and a recognizable brand name as a merchant, which you can put on in front of your store. So yes, there are definitely hidden costs payments, and that's definitely why the whole cost thing has much potential. But of course, I agree with you that means that you need to make costs much more transparent. And then you can really get competition in a level playing field between different payment methods. But right now, the cost is very much hidden in a lot of these aspects. Okay, so another unique selling point for Bitcoin is there. Okay, we have no frozen accounts. Nobody can keep me away from my Bitcoins. Yeah, but if if you put them somewhere else in somebody else's wallet, then yes, then keep keep sole control of your wallets is always a bad
This
thing.
was speaking out of experience.
I did lose some bitcoins in Narcos. Didn't we all? Or maybe not. So, okay, but there's no frozen accounts. Is that now a thing that consumers say, yes, that makes me want to adopt bitcoins? But again, for which users is this really attractive? So, maybe challenge here again, but most users have no problems with bank regulation and anti-fraud mechanisms, and they trust their bank to keep their money safe. And I'm going out on a limb here and say that 99% of people never experience a problem with a frozen bank account. It could be interesting if you are in niche markets where you, especially as a merchant, may have more trouble getting a bank account or keeping a bank account rather. You might be willing to accept the higher barrier to entry of Bitcoin to accept Bitcoin because you have less problem with frozen accounts. So the adult entertainment industry, for example, which is traditionally has a hard time getting bank accounts. Naturally, illegal users would have a problem getting a bank account, but let's focus on obeying the law and trying to promote Bitcoin.
Cannabis industry.
Yeah, for example. So the legalized cannabis industry will still have a hard time because of reputation risks. Bank will not really want to do business with them. Prostitution is also in the Netherlands, at least, it's also an example. You would not want to force these industries into the illegal sector because then you of course have all kinds of problems. So for them, Bitcoin may have some potential, but it's still going to be difficult to really get the gap to bridge the gap to the majority. So this kind of follows on from the last one. There's no prerequisites to get into Bitcoin. You just download the software and you're good to go, right? Well, that's a little bit questionable. Is it really true that there's no prerequisites to start working with Bitcoin? Well, you can start working with the network, sure, but how do you get Bitcoin? How do you get your assets in there? So consumers, of course, they can go to some exchange, but yeah, those exchanges, let's face it, are not really designed for me to get a few bitcoins to buy a pizza. They're made for traders. I have to do all kinds of KYC stuff and put in orders and wait until my price is met. It's way too much of a hassle. You don't want to do that, to use it just as a payment method. Okay, so peer-to-peer, I can get Bitcoin from someone I know who already has Bitcoin. Yeah, that's just then you just displace the problem. So if everybody already had Bitcoins, yeah, sure, then it's no problem. But we're talking about growing the network here. So yeah, it's still not really going to work there. Buying a Bitcoin seller then, so for example Bitonic or others, yeah, that works, and it's quite low barrier, so I can do an ideal transaction or maybe a credit card or PayPal payment, and I get Bitcoins. Super. But why am I doing that again? I mean, as a consumer, if I'm going to do if I'm able to do an ideal transaction anyway, couldn't I just do that at the merchant?
Well, if the payment method in Bitcoin is cheaper than the ideal method, then there's an incentive right there. For example, what Thuisbezorgd is doing. Because the Bitcoin payment is the cheapest electronic payment there.
Yes. If the price difference becomes large enough, but then we're going back to the cost argument rather than oh, it's so easy to get Bitcoin. But that's true. Research shows, though, that convenience very often trumps cost for a lot of consumers, especially in like impulse buys. It, 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 there are, of course, again, niche groups, people who go look for all the coupons and all the discount rates and everything, etc., etc. But most people will just say, okay, click one-click convenience. They will pay for that, even if it's a kind of a little bit of a hidden cost, because if they went through 3 different steps, they might have gotten 2% off. Yeah, but there you have time versus money, basically. Yeah. It could still be interesting. So why would you do that? Because just transferring your euros to bitcoins to do a payment at a merchant means that you have to load this wallet, and you already had a bank account. The inconvenience of wallets has been shown in the Netherlands, at least, quite clearly with the whole chip knip payment method, which has now been phased out, because people found it irritating that, okay, I have this other chip card where there's some kind of stored value on there, I don't really know how much it is, and it's always too little when it really counts, and then I have to top it up anyway. It could be interesting for groups like the unbanked. So if you really cannot do any kind of normal, let's say, payment method, then it's very interesting that there is very little barrier to entry for Bitcoin. But is this in the Netherlands that will actually pretty much never be really a big problem? It's very much interesting, of course, for the developing world. So here
they
we
are
have
the majority.
Sorry?
They are the majority.
In that sense, yes. So if we take a bigger picture look and say, okay, worldwide, what will stimulate the adoption of Bitcoin? Then yes, we definitely need to look at things like remittance payments, where the only alternatives are things like Western Union or MoneyGram, where it becomes quite expensive for someone to send like 100 euros back to his family in Africa, for example. And then Bitcoin becomes very much an interesting payment method. But for everybody here in the developed world, maybe not so much. But the important point here is, if we ever want to bridge that gap, then at least we need to make that barrier to entry lower, to make it less of a hassle to really get Bitcoin. Maybe even make it kind of totally transparent to pay with Bitcoin. Maybe I don't even need to know that I'm paying with Bitcoin. I can just, it looks like a euro payment, but I get the benefits of the Bitcoin infrastructure. Now, the final unique selling point of Bitcoin, of course, is it's anonymous. Is that going to help us really get a large user base? Well, it's a double-edged sword. So the anonymity is, of course, something that it definitely has over something like Apple Pay, which is not going to be anonymous by a long shot. But will that really get the large majority of people in? Not only because it's the double-edged sword about regulation, which we weren't going to talk about, but let's face it, a lot of governments and police departments are concerned about Bitcoin because of the whole anonymity thing. So it could be an interesting niche for some consumers, this whole anonymity story. For example, for activists, for privacy-minded idealists.
So Bitcoin, the Bitcoin project, on their website claims that Bitcoin is not anonymous.
Yeah, I know that's true, but I didn't want to derail the whole presentation by talking about whether Bitcoin is or is not anonymous. Let's keep it at it is perceived as anonymous, and it's let's say it is at least more anonymous than most other electronic payment methods, and less anonymous than cash. So yeah, I don't want to make this a discussion about whether or not it's anonymous. I agree with you, and I know all the research which is done about tracing Bitcoin payments, and especially in a startup phase where the most normal way to get bitcoins is by paying for them with an electronic euro transaction, then of course you have a lot more ways to follow people. But I digress. There's also work being done to make Bitcoin payments more anonymous, or with the whole dark coin development, etc. So it could be very interesting for certain types of payments. For example, donations to charities or political parties, which you might not want to be associated with, but have very legitimate reason to want to donate money to. There might actually be very, very healthy and interesting way to pay. WikiLeaks is of course one that springs to mind. But the question here is focusing on anonymity as a unique selling point going to help Bitcoin at this point? Well, it has some use cases, but it has also this big risk that if you're promoting it as an anonymous payment method, yeah, you might actually only get regulators up in the air before it really takes off. So we're finding some ways where Bitcoin might really have these attractive properties, but let's face it, other payment providers also aren't standing still. So where it used to be, okay, you only have credit cards on the internet, notoriously fraud sensitive, and still you can't go a month without thousands of credit card records being leaked. So I would never recommend let's all start using credit cards online. But the security and the fraud detection are really catching up, and Apple Pay is in that sense a really good step forward for using credit card-like payments in a secure manner, because they really do a lot with keeping your credentials